The next item is item number 4. It says design overlay. Here it says design overlay for the west side redevelopment area is what the discussion was going to be. However, for example, the west side or the CRA, we wanted to come up with some ideas from this board as to how to deal with the redevelopment of property in the CRA, which includes the urban core CRA, the east side CRA, TIF, and the west side. If you go along and you're walking into the west side, for example, there are housing going up in that area. However, some of the housing is not conducive to the neighborhood. It doesn't have any of the character of the neighborhoods. And so when you look at overlay districts, which we do have, we have the historic overlay downtown area. We have the North Hill Park, which is part of the CRA. We have the historic East Hill, his preservation district. And so we have districts that restrict or require some type of design and consideration for housing and houses and businesses and what they look like. Other than those areas, we do not have any guidelines at all in reference to what the housing should look like or any of those except for basic land development code. What we were trying to do here is to get some idea from the board as to what they think doing an overlay district for the entire CRAs, all of them, the west side as well as the east side would be, and what those ideas are, what considerations that you would have in reference to us going through that work and reference with that issue. When you look at the housing, some of the housing that's been built on the west side, it has nothing to do with the historic preservation of the area. They just put housing in there, whether the flat roofs are in there, it will apply to any building. And so that is why this was brought forth before we get ready to go and look at really getting into the work of doing an overlay district. Okay, Ms. Gibson, you want to expound on that?
Madam Chair, yes, ma'am. I would like to also point out that the plans that have been adopted for each of the redevelopment sub-areas, the West Side CRA, the Urban Core Plan of 2010, the update, and the East Side Plan, all do have recommendations for establishing some design or aesthetic review in each of those districts. Because the market is beginning to warm up a bit, heat up a bit, we now see quite a bit of development. We see quite a bit of construction, which is great. We welcome that within our CRAs. However, you will note in just driving by that many of the much of the construction that is going on in that area that is outside of one of the special districts that Board Member Canada Wynn just referenced don't particularly align with the traditional character of the older structures in the area. So it would be very appropriate, and it would be an implementation of the plans to move forward with some kind of aesthetic design, which would be as an overlay. Right now we do have we have 4 aesthetic review districts: the Halifax Historic District, the Government Street, the North 9th Avenue, and Airport Boulevard. So we could certainly develop additional overlay districts that do not affect the underlying zoning, but do add design guidelines to guide development activity so that the aesthetic character and the market value of the neighborhoods is enhanced and preserved.
Okay. Any concerns on the board? Yes, Mr. Tahar.
Yeah, I would be okay with some very minimal, maybe overlay district. I'm not a big fan of overlay districts. I think that putting more constraints on people who want to either buy property or develop property is sometimes not a good thing. I know we've had some issues with several, or at least one board that has some authority over an overlay district, and it's getting to the point where I've talked with many people how they don't even want to come and develop property because it's such a burden to go through this process. And I don't like putting, while I do think that there needs to be some, like I said, very minimal guidelines, I don't want us to get into the design, I don't want to start telling people what they have to build other than it's got to be, certain, it's got to be a house, or it's got to be, I don't really want to get into telling people the way they need to build their house and stuff. So that's just me. I've never really been a fan of it. I've run across it a couple times when I'm trying to do something and it gets so burdensome that sometimes you just kind of throw your hands up and say, well, then I'm not going to do it anyway. So that's just my point.
Okay. Dr. Wu, and then Mr. Baird.
I would like to piggyback on what Councilman Tahar says. The dilemma I see is, who do you set up to be the judge? And then when somebody wants to build something, do people have to submit their plans to this panel? And if the panel disapproves it, are you telling this person who went out and bought a land, you don't like the looks of their house, so they can't build it? So I understand the concern, but on the other hand, to me, the devil's in the details. How in the world do you tell people, and who makes that decision? One thing that you may see that you might think is a beautiful piece of art, I might look at it and think it's awful, and vice versa. And indeed, that often happens. My wife and I will go to art festival, and she'll look at something and say, "Oh, that's wonderful," and I'm looking at it and saying, I don't care for it. So, as Mr. Tahar said, I'm just afraid of getting into where we're overseeing too much on what people can and cannot do.
Mr. Baird.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm going to agree with my my fellow board members here. That's right. Doesn't always happen that way, but I look at our agenda and I see nothing on this item. I mean, it appears on the agenda as number 4, design overlay for West Side redevelopment area. There's really no backup, nothing to really. I don't even know if CRAs do this as a rule. I think it broadens our scope beyond what the CRA needs to be doing, designating overlay districts or designs. I just think that that's more of a city function, not so much a CRA function. I do have a question for Ms. Gibson, though. Do other CRAs do this? Do they have overlay districts that the CRA designates?
Board Member Baird, yes. It's very frequently done within a CRA district. Very widely used within the state of Florida. And what we would be talking about is a kind of area design guidelines. We wouldn't be talking about things that would actually be required to go before a particular board. As was mentioned, it would simply be stated in the land development code. It would address things like building placement, architectural style, generally detail, scale and massing, roof design, roof pitch, those types of broad things that would set a tone for what the project becomes. And it would be something that would simply be an administrative process, similar to anyone that wants to build now. They have to come. They generally come in. They talk with staff. What is allowed in this district? What's allowed in this zone that I want to build in before they develop their property. So it would just be It would be additional, but it would not be restrictive in the sense of dictating what colors, color schemes, and those types of stringent requirements that you would have in some of the historic districts. It would not add on to the expense of developing your property like it does in the historic districts, where you have to go to the ARB and you have to pay a fee, and it adds time. So it would be a much simpler version. It would be something that could be implemented administratively by staff, but it's anticipated that if there was a dispute, if someone had a piece of property that they wanted to develop and they had a dispute in the way staff interpreted what was in the code, that they could then appeal to an ARB or some other board.
Thank you. Just further comment. Just adds another layer, I think, to what people have to wade through in this city to be able to develop. And when you say staff, the last time I checked, CRA doesn't have any true staff. You're kind of loaned to us, and you have additional duties. And so I see this being a burden that we can't even afford to do. Plus, I just don't think we have enough information to really do anything today. And I realize it's just a discussion item, but I don't feel like I have enough information on I mean, what you said was it was very informational. But again, I just think there's too many reasons not to do it at this time. And maybe when we have money and we can afford staff and don't have to borrow the mayor's staff, it might be different.
Okay. Ms. Myers?
Well, I am in favor of some design standards, especially to preserve the character of neighborhoods. I also think that there's some reasons why we might want to incentivize people to do things like when they're putting in a driveway to use pervious surfacing. That could decrease their stormwater fee, because obviously they're keeping their stormwater on site better. But I think that I just want to give you an example. It's not in the CRA district. When you mentioned placement of structures on property, where you would want to have some say over how something is situated on a piece of property. There are 3 businesses that have just built structures at Cordova Mall. Guess what? One of those businesses placed their building so that the back of the building is facing 9th Avenue. And our core business district, right across the street from Sacred Heart Hospital, guess what? We get to look at all of their electrical plumbing, all of their where their dumpsters are. Now, the back of the building looks nice, but because of certain codes, you have to be a certain feet away from this and that and this and that. But, I mean, can you think of any, and this could happen to many of our main streets. You could actually build buildings on Cervantes Street where the back of the building is facing Cervantes Street. It could happen on Palafox Street. I was shocked when I saw this building. And we should have, not just in the CRA district, but we need to have some standards on just minimal standards. And the problem is this developer, this company is out of town. They don't know where they are, really and truly, and with the jewelry store. And so that's just an example in my district why I think you need some minimal standards that you don't have, as Ms. Gibson said, you wouldn't have to go and have anything approved by any board or anything. It's just that these would be in the land development code, and you would know, well, this is, if I want to get a building permit to build this, this is what I'm going to have to build it to. So I think that we should discuss, or have staff bring before us, or maybe have a workshop on this issue. I think it's an important issue, and so I'm in favor of pursuing it and looking at how other CRA districts, do this in other areas, but I don't see it as being overburdensome.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be.
Mr.
Thank you.
Winkett.
I just wanted to ask if the city didn't have any resources in planning and zoning, or the different boards that we have working for the city to maybe handle something in this area.
Board Member Wingate, it would be anticipated that a consultant would be engaged, an architectural consultant that would actually look at the existing character of these neighborhoods and develop some standards that could then be included in the land development code. And that process would go through planning staff and planning board. Once it was approved by planning board and city council, then it would simply be a part of our existing land development code. And again, when anyone came to develop, they would go through the standard process, which is to go through the planning staff, and then they would go through the permitting, the building permitting department. And what those departments do is to review any proposals for permitting based on what is in the land development code. So it would just be that standard process and procedure, and it would not require any additional staffing to do. It would actually not be directly handled by the CRA staff.
Okay. Well, what's going to happen here is your information is very vital, but we're going to get some examples from CRAs across the state. I'm also going to take some pictures of what's going up on the west side of town so that you can really look at what's been going up and see whether or not why that same type of dwelling is not being put on the east side of town, but it's being put up on the west side of town. So I'll have some copies of that so that we'll be able to move, forward, because in the West Side Redevelopment Plan itself, it talks about those aesthetics and the design and the characters of the neighborhood. And so this is very, very helpful in bringing something back for an actual CRA work on it. If you come up with other things and other comments, please send them to Ms. Gibson so that she'll be able to know and be able to look at whatever your concerns are in reference to creating any type of overlay district. If there are no other comments from the board, people in the audience, Ms. Dubuisson, you were there?
Yes. I want to clarify, the agenda item stated that this was for the West Side redevelopment, so any discussion about any of the rest of it is really probably inappropriate. And had we known that the Urban Core CRA would have been discussed, I'm certain that a lot of the neighborhood members from at least the western side of the Urban Core of the CRA would have been there, because we have put forward a proposal under the Restore Act to get this very thing accomplished in the Belmont de Villiers neighborhood. We are number 22 in the rankings right now, and we'll be making a 3-minute presentation on Wednesday. So if we're not at your meeting, it may be because we're still trying to convince the county committee to look at it. But we have been having neighborhood meetings with both the CRA and the planning board because of issues that have come up. And you can just drive a few blocks over and see 3 examples of infill housing and how our conversations with the developer has taken it from a faux stucco on the ground building to an 18-inch above the ground pitch of roof that looks similar to some of the historical buildings that were there before, gone from no front porch to an 8-foot front porch. There are just some concepts that harken back to the character of the neighborhood that we have been able to encourage by conversation. And as Ms. Gibson said, if those are incorporated, no one wants an ARB. That was real clear in our recent meeting. No one wants to have to go and have fuchsia or purple or pink, decided by someone else. But there are some things that impact all of us in the walkability, the visual environment, as well as the stormwater retention issues that we have there. So I would encourage you to look at a future time as doing this and to separate the various neighborhoods, because there are different architectural styles in each neighborhood, and I think you owe that to them. But I also would appreciate if this CRA, I will be bringing it up into the public forum, would consider endorsing our proposal, because we have scored very highly, and we're very proud of the fact that they have moved us from 34th, which was our original ranking, up to 22nd, and having a letter of support from the CRA in funding $450,000 worth of planning monies that would come directly to you, because we actually kind of figured that the money would come to the city or the CRA as the fiduciary agent. We would hope that you would be the ones who would apply for it, that, we would be bringing monies to you to help answer the problem that's there. So I would ask you to look at this as closely as you can. I realize that Wednesday is close and you may not want to entertain a motion today to support us, but we would certainly hope that you would. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. As she's coming up, Ms. Gibson, you want to make a comment?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would also like to point out that the East Side Redevelopment Board made a recommendation in its action plan a year ago to implement this, and $25,000 of those funds was appropriated by CRA and the City Council to implement an overlay for the East Side.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Beverly Perry, resident of Belmont Villas, Vice President of the Neighborhood Association, and without getting into too much detail, I would just encourage discussion of overlays to give communities options to decide for themselves. We also have in no way gone as far as specific regulations or desiring ARB regulations or anything like North Hill or anything. But our community, and I would imagine other communities, would like the option to look at overlays and to decide at least on minimal standards. So I would encourage discussion of this item.
Okay, thank you. If there are no more discussions, yes, Mr. Monk?
I'm very concerned about the idea of our government getting too heavily involved in the way in which housing is being determined. We have a housing crisis in Pensacola. We do not have enough housing for all of the people that live here in our community, and I believe we're going to have to get inventive about the way in which we address that housing crisis. And other communities have been able to do that, and one of the ways that they are doing that is by utilizing non-traditional architecture. And if we start limiting that ability, then we are limiting being able to step into the future of how we handle housing. I don't think that it is good or appropriate for our community to determine that a particular decade was the right way in which houses were built and nobody can do anything stepping into the future. We have an energy crisis, and many of the houses that are addressing being eco-friendly are not going to look good or function the way that they need to if we determine that 1940 was the best year that houses were ever built and all houses have to match that particular criteria. And so if we are going to move forward as a community, we have limited space where we can build houses, and I just believe that if we are going to end up having space not only for new people that are going to come to our community, but also to be able to house the people who already live here. And I'm not just talking about people who are currently living without houses, and we're going to have to get pretty inventive on how we're going to address that issue. But people who are just currently living in homes that are not equipped anymore for them to live in them. Poor housing that already exists. People need to be able to move into something that's better. And I think if we start heavily limiting, I think instead of maybe trying to get the west side to match what's happening in other communities, maybe we should take a step back and evaluate whether those communities should be as protected as they are. Because we need to get to a point where we're able to actually address the housing epidemic that we have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, seeing no other comments on this issue, now we are at open forum. Yes, Ms. Dubuisson?
Yes, I want to invite all of you as members of the CRA to read this before. If you were to read it, you will find that one of the action plan items which was approved by the CRA and the City Council was to develop an historical overlay for Belmont de Villiers. Unfortunately, that was 11 years ago, and it has not happened. To Reverend Monk's point, we do want energy efficiency, which is why one of the components of our proposal to restore was to create a energy efficient building prototype that would reduce the cost of building so that rather than individuals having to hire individual architects, we would have prototype plans that would be made available. The buildings that I was referencing earlier that we've been working with the builder on are extremely energy efficient. They are storm protective. They're a snap together system that in 40 days gives a build out of a complete home. So what we're trying to do is exactly what Reverend Monk has indicated in building affordable homes, good quality homes that have lower cost of living. All we're asking is that the nature of the neighborhood be preserved as much as possible. No one is dictating any particular decade or anything. We have a gamut in Belmont de Villiers from the 1890s through to 2013 in design opportunities there. However, I would invite you all to read that 38 or 39-page document very thoroughly. We are dealing with the zoning issues that were not completed, and once that is completed, then this overlay would really help us in attracting. We have quite a few out-of-town investors who are right now, and some in town, right now looking at bringing affordable housing into Belmont, and they want some guidance. They have voluntarily come to us, but we don't know how many others, if it were already down there, would lose that fear of building in Belmont, which for some reason occurred in the last decade or so, and recognize that we are the best household addition to downtown Pensacola. So please take the time to read the entire CRA plan of 2004, which was passed on March 19th, and there was a plan of action. You got through the first 5 steps of a 39 plan of action, so there's something already in place. And if you would consider, please, endorsing the project that Ms. Perry submitted on behalf of the Neighborhood Association. We met for 9 months as an association to come up with the plan. We continue to meet with the CRA and the Planning Division trying to work on the steps to implement what we need to have done there to strengthen the neighborhood, but $450,000 to be brought to the resources of getting the plans developed and getting the neighborhood on track would be an asset bringing to you instead of asking you for money. So please consider whether you might endorse that. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Meyer.
Yes, I'd like to request that the documents that Ms. Dubuisson referred to be sent to the CRA members.
Yes, ma'am. As a result of the discussion, we're going to have all of those from the Belmont and DeVillas and the other east side as well, and the west side, and everything sent, so that you'll be able to see that this is not just, a new issue, but an issue that we have discussed. So we will send all of that, and she will get with scheduling, future discussions.
May I ask a question, Madam Chair? In what format? Some of the documents are fairly large. They are all currently available on the city's website. May I please ask what form you're anticipating?
If they're already available, you can just direct us to where they are on the city's website. Okay?
Absolutely.
And we can go there and look at them.
Okay. I was getting ready to close the meeting, but you had one more speaker. Did you want? No, you didn't want to speak in there. Ms. Dubuisson has made a request that we endorse that proposal. The Belmont, I haven't seen anything on that at all. I haven't seen any information. It's unfortunate that it's going to be Wednesday. And we don't have time to do that, so I don't see that is possible, for right now.
I appreciate that it is a time constraint, and I remember that the chairwoman had asked about having all the city restore projects that had anything to do with the city be brought before City Council. We had hoped that that would have occurred prior to them all being heard by the committee. They have changed their timeline. Some groups will not be heard till January, so you will have time to review theirs. Ours is on the website of Restore. You may go on. It's called Belmont de Villiers Heritage Revisited is the specific one I'm talking to, because there are a couple of others. But that one came out of the Neighborhood Association. But I do appreciate that there's a time, constraint. But I would ask you to bring it forward, because in January, if we were to be able to step up and say that you have endorsed it, it would help us when it gets to the County Commission if we make it that far. Thank you.
Mr. Baird?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to let Ms. Dubuisson know that we are going to have a workshop in January to discuss the restore projects.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay, anything else? Any unfinished business? Any new business from board members? Okay, if not, we'll adjourn.